I'm going to go ahead and call this Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Just for the record, Councilors Sweeney, Caltabiano, and Fury are excused and all in much warmer places than Whitefish. With that said, we'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Bear, do you mind leading us tonight? Thanks. Thank you, Bear. We'll move on to communications from the public. We do have one public hearing advertised this evening, which will be item 6A of our agenda. If you're wishing to provide comment on anything unrelated to the public hearing, now would be your opportunity. And just for the record, your name and address, please, when you approach the council.
Councilors and Mayor, I'm Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. I saw in your packet that there's a letter suggesting the installation of parking meters downtown. Well, we had parking meters and we took them out because it was a deterrent to commerce, and our small businesses in Whitefish are already in a pretty difficult retail environment competing with all the big box stores to the south. So instead of parking meters, we have an SID for parking that each of those property owners pays on their property tax and helps to defray the expense of the parking structure. And I think that that's a better way to have businesses support parking than to put parking meters, which create a deterrent to customers supporting their businesses. And I think if this were public, you would get quite an outcry from the downtown businesses, because it's well documented that meters do prevent some people from supporting local establishments. So, thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Further public comments? That would be next.
Good evening, council members. Kurt Vonfeld, Terra Design Works, Landscape Architecture. I'm here to represent Ryan and Crystal Scott, consent agenda item E. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate it. Further public comment this evening? Michelle, anyone online? Not seeing any. We will move to item 4, which is our communications from volunteer boards. And we do have a letter in the packet from the Climate Action Plan Committee to establish metered parking in the downtown area. Dakota. And Nathan.
So good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Dakota Whitman. I am the current chair of the Climate Change Action Plan Committee. And just to give a little background on how we kind of ended up talking about the possibility of metered parking, because we are just recommending that it get investigated. We're not wholesale recommending that it get implemented. Is the committee thought it was timely to revisit the transportation and land use chapter within the Climate Action Plan, given the growth policy that is going on right now and Safe Streets for All, the plan for Safe Streets for All being developed. And when you've been in kind of my line of work and my academic background long enough, what you realize when you really get into climate change is that it forces you to reckon with some pretty uncomfortable and controversial topics. And one of those that arose out of our investigation into the transportation and land use chapter was Whitefish's car dependency. And there was a lot of hesitancy within the committee discussing this topic because, as we know, it is controversial. And what the committee did was, when we really talked it through, it's kind of hard to disentangle the fact that free parking is really promoting car dependency within the town, which is the Flathead Valley's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, our personal vehicle miles traveled. And so to learn more about this, because the committee didn't want to lightly recommend this, we had a meeting with Julie Dixon from Dixon Resources Unlimited, who has done other parking plans for the city. And she gave us a wealth of data and a wealth of great info. You know, she has tons and tons of data from tons of communities that show that commerce within areas of paid parking actually has increased, and how there is much more technology now to allow for flexibility, where it's much easier to install windows, like time windows for paid parking, and to install to have seasonality if need be. And the big selling point for the committee was there is much more technology available now to implement a locals exemption, because the committee does not believe that local taxpayers should pay for parking in downtown. And we believe that the potential hundreds of thousands of dollars that could be raised for this could be used to put real serious investments into Whitefish's public transportation options. Because as I mentioned earlier, that is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, is people driving their personal cars. And as you just heard in the work session, the most common trip in Whitefish, in a vehicle in Whitefish, is about half a mile or less. And so with all that, the committee believes that it's worth, it would be worth the council's time to investigate it further. Again, we're not recommending that it get installed. We're just recommending that it gets investigated into further. Thank you.
Thanks, Dakota. Nathan, anything to add?
Nathan Dugan, not a lot to add. I just want to reiterate that the committee is not saying whether or not this should happen. You all could investigate it and find for a multitude of reasons that it's not going to be beneficial, but we think that there's potential there to fund a lot of other modes of transportation that would allow people to get out of their cars if they so choose and are able-bodied and able to do that. And yeah, so we're asking that you take a serious look at it. Clearly, it's very hard to park in the summer especially, and we need some more management of that. This is definitely one tool that is a funding stream for alleviating some of that.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, Dakota. Any comments from the council? I would recommend, until we have a full council at our next meeting, hopefully, that we defer any discussion or direction back to staff until we have a full council present, with all due respect. I know that they'd personally like to weigh in as well. So that would be my recommendation, but we can certainly talk about it at the end of the meeting if you so choose. With that said, you have the consent agenda enclosed in your packet with the January 6th, 2025 regular meeting minutes as well as the work session minutes. Can I have a motion, please?
I move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
And the consent agenda?
And the consent agenda.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, Michelle, which brings us to our one and only public hearing of the evening, which will be Resolution 25-2, adopting a Safe Streets for All action plan, and this is on page 93 of your packet. Craig.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I'd also like to mention that Sarah and Carrie from RPA are here, and after I briefly go through the staff report, they'll have a presentation to make prior to opening the public hearing, if that's all right with you guys. So the city was awarded a Safe Streets for All grant back in 2023 to assist with the drafting of a comprehensive safety action plan where the goal was established to have 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2030. The plan is intended to identify the most significant roadway safety concerns in the community, and adoption of the plan will allow for future SS4A construction grants or implementation grants. Back in January of last year, almost exactly a year ago, we awarded a contract to RPA to draft the plan. A task force was quickly formed, including city staff, MDT, community leaders, and local safety partners. Since then, 4 task force meetings have been held at critical stages in the plan's development. A dedicated website was also established early on to facilitate public engagement and share information throughout the planning process. In addition to providing project information, the website featured an online commenting map for public input, which was integral to the completion of this plan. To gather more targeted feedback, the team conducted interviews with the Whitefish Police Department, Whitefish School District, Explore Whitefish, Dream Adaptive, Safe Trails Whitefish, MDT, and the Big Mountain Commercial Association. Finally, the city held 2 public open houses, a council work session, and the walk and roll event to engage the public and promote biking and walking in Whitefish. The current budget for the Safe Streets for All plan is $200,000, which has been funded by a $160,000 grant and $40,000 in city funds. We did advertise for a public hearing to consider the resolution adopting the plan, but prior to that, I would like to turn it over to Sarah and Carrie to give a brief presentation.
Thanks, Craig. Welcome, Sarah and Carrie.
Mayor and councilors, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you tonight. We have just a brief presentation that we'd like to share with some highlights from the plan so that everyone has the ability to understand if they haven't had a chance to take a look at the plan yet. So we'll ask Michelle to step through here. So in terms of the items we wanted to touch on, Craig talked a little bit about the program overview, so I'll give just a very quick summary there. We'll touch on the outreach and engagement, and especially what has occurred since the last time that we met in our work session, since October. And then we'd like to just touch on a couple of the key elements from the draft action plan that's been available for public review. And lastly, we'll talk about implementation and next steps for the plan. So in terms of the program overview, Craig touched on a number of these elements, but as he mentioned, the city was awarded this grant by the Department of Transportation, and so we have been focused on developing a safety action plan for the community of Whitefish. And this is a really important step to set the city up and position the city for eligibility for future grants, including demonstration and implementation grants. There are 2 additional funding cycles coming up in fiscal years 25 and 26. So now that this action plan is complete, and hopefully with the decision to adopt, then you'll be well positioned to go after those next grants. So in terms of outreach and engagement, Craig also touched on a number of these points. So we'll just move to the next slide here. He mentioned all of these different activities that we had conducted. Since the last time we talked with you at the October work session, we held a public meeting, and we also have held a public review period from December to January. In terms of that public meeting in October, there were 11 attendees that joined us for that. We had exhibits placed around the room for folks to study some of the initial recommendations for the plan. We also had an interactive exercise where we were asking for people to vote on their top priorities for projects. So all of that information from the public outreach has been incorporated and considered in the plan. So in terms of the draft action plan, just wanted to touch on a couple of key elements, and we'll move on to the next slide here. This draft plan has been available for public review from December 20th through yesterday, January 20th, and the plan summarizes all of the work effort that has gone into this planning exercise, and of course in coordination with our task force as well. So we're summarizing that in the draft plan here. We'll move to the next slide. Would like to just touch on and remind everyone the focus areas and goals. So Craig mentioned the top kind of umbrella goal is to eliminate fatalities and suspected serious injuries over the life of this plan by 2030. And there are 4 focus areas that have been identified to try to accomplish that. So these are relating to non-motorist involved crashes, intersection crashes, speed-related crashes, and then inattentive driver crashes. So these are the 4 focus areas that the community selected, and also based on review of crash data that we identified for the plan. And associated with each of those, there are goals and specific targets that we've outlined to try to achieve over the life of this plan. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie next to talk a little bit about recommendations from the plan.
Thanks, Sarah.
So our recommendations are separated into 4 different groups. The first one is strategies, which I like to call our toolbox. So that is a place where you can go if there are future projects identified and you're not really sure where to start. That's a really good place to start, and lots of different ideas there. And then projects are very specific projects. They're more construction oriented, and we have identified specific projects that could be competitive for future grant funds under the Safe Streets for All program as well. Then we have programs and policies, and so these are meant to be ongoing efforts year after year, and then potentially policies that the council could adopt to give some of these things more teeth going forward. So I'll talk about the strategies first. They're organized by our 4 focus areas. So first, the non-motorized strategies focus on maintaining what you already have in terms of non-motorized facilities, enhancing what you already have, and then opportunities to install new facilities, and then just generally focusing on encouraging safe and proper walking and biking. We tried to make these strategies all-encompassing, so we're not only looking at engineering solutions, we're looking at education, enforcement, the tie-ins with EMS, those kinds of things as well. So jumping to intersection strategies, we looked at this from the perspective of signalized intersections and unsignalized intersections. and then also just general opportunities to improve visibility and safety at intersections for all users. And then inattentive driver strategies, first focusing on promoting distraction-free driving through educational programming, but then also penalizing distracted driving through enforcement strategies, and then counteracting distracted driving through infrastructure strategies. So big toolbox there. And then from the speed perspective, looking at reviewing the posted speed limits and looking out for opportunities to potentially lower speed limits in certain areas where it makes sense, but also looking at opportunities to reduce travel speeds and ways to do that without affecting the speed limit necessarily, but just encouraging drivers to drive slower. So with that, we get into our program and policy recommendations. From program recommendation standpoint, we're looking at a non-motorized audit. So that's gathering community members. Dream Adaptive has said that they were really interested in this. Looking at the non-motorized facilities within the city, looking at opportunities that we can enhance those resources, looking where we can connect them, where we can extend them, or overall improve accessibility of those facilities. The next one is a non-motorist count program, and this ties back to the focus area goal for non-motorists, just determining how many people are already walking and biking, and then having a way to measure how many more people are walking and biking with the implementation of this plan. Program 3 is walking, biking, and transit resources, just having a one-stop shop for those resources for people who want to walk and bike in Whitefish. And then 4 and 5 kind of go hand in hand, but looking at opportunities to enhance school traffic safety through educational campaigns, enforcement, that kind of thing. And then traffic calming program speaks to those speed-related strategies, but a programmatic thing that allows community members to approach the city with areas where they would like to see traffic calming, and then a structure for implementing those types of projects. In terms of policy recommendations, we heard a lot about e-bikes, especially in the downtown area. So we're recommending regulation to e-bikes, especially within downtown. For policy 2, safe routes to school, the city already does have a safe routes to school plan, but we're recommending that 1, it be updated because it's quite old now, and then 2, formalizing those routes. That can be through a policy decision, but then also implementing signage to make sure visitors know where those are too. And then policy 3 is the complete streets policy. And the city already has many elements in their standards that speak to this, but formalizing that and making it a policy going forward is something we're recommending. So jumping into the project recommendations, we shared with the council these in their draft form, but we've since finalize them, taking into account everything that we've heard so far within the planning process. And then we took the next step to prioritize them into 3 different time frames. So short-term, mid-term, and long-term, ranging from 1 to 20 years of implementation. We had 4 criteria for this prioritization. The first one being past planning. So was this project recommended in any sort of past planning document? Whether that be the transportation plan, the walking and biking plan, Connect Whitefish, the climate plan, the downtown business plan, all of those different things. And then with this being a safety-driven plan, crash data was the second prioritization criteria. So we did develop a high injury network that looked at some of the most severe locations for crashes. So that was something that played into this prioritization. And then community support. Since the community is the one implementing this, we really need to see their support, and we really want to see that they're involved in this plan. So we looked at that from 2 different perspectives. One being our online commenting map on our website, and the public meeting feedback that we got at our first public meeting. And then the second being our prioritization exercise at the second public meeting that Sarah spoke about earlier, as well as feedback from our task force. So we tried to quantify those comments in order to develop prioritization criteria. And the final thing is estimated cost. We developed planning level cost estimates for each of these projects, and then we looked at how much it would cost, what potential funding sources could be, and then whether there was dedicated funding already. So for example, one of our projects is the 6th Street reconstruction, and that already has a dedicated funding source, and that's moving forward. This is an example of the prioritization, so you can look at the plan and see the scoring for every single project that's on our list. So this is just a snapshot, but you can see how each project is categorized into a time frame. when it's expected to be implemented based on priority. And then also we identified 3 projects that we feel are most eligible or most competitive for future grant funding. So the first one being the 13th Street and Spokane Avenue intersection. The second one being US 93 south of town, basically on the south side of town. And then the third one being First Street and Baker Avenue, looking at opportunities to improve safety at that intersection, either through signalization or improvements to that RRFB at that crosswalk. Hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Carrie.
Just a few more slides here to go. So mentioned that we've been holding a public review period from December 20th through January 20th. And we advertised this widely. We had an email out to our contact list and it was posted on the website. There was a press release to media outlets, and I think the Whitefish pilot also did a feature article. And then there were some social media posts as well to get the word out. During that period, we had 6 sets of comments that we received, and we just wanted to quickly step through those with you so you're aware of what type of comment we've received. So the first comment was focused on the pedestrian crossing at Woodside and Wisconsin, and also sidewalks on Denver Avenue. And I should say with these comments, they range from on the one hand, comments that we feel are addressed in the plan, and we are pointing those out in a couple of locations, versus there are a couple of these comments where we think there could be some minor adjustments made to the plan. So in this first case, felt like this comment could be addressed by program number 1, that non-motorized audit that Carrie mentioned. So the idea being that the city would take a holistic look at all of the pedestrian facilities within the entire city and then start to prioritize some of these locations. And public comments like this one would help identify some of those target locations. Additionally, some of the strategies that Carrie ran through directly relate to this as well. So maintaining existing facilities, enhancing existing non-motorized facilities, and then potentially installing new facilities. The second and third comments were very similar, and they also addressed Wisconsin Avenue, asking for some improvements at crosswalks, whether that's a flashing light or potentially looking at reduced speeds, additional maintenance of pedestrian facilities, and then also improved snow bus stops. Lastly, the comments requested some broad educational campaigns, instructing residents about snow removal and drivers about making sure that they're stopping for pedestrians in the walkway. Felt like these comments also were addressed by our existing strategies. So maintaining existing and installing new pedestrian facilities, also encouraging safe and proper walking and biking, reviewing posted speed limits, and then lastly, reducing vehicular travel speeds. So feeling like we're addressing this comment as well. The next comment, so the memorial plan, vision plan has undergone some changes recently. So what we had originally included in our draft safety plan was a previous version of this memorial vision plan. And the updated changes include removing the mid-block crossing on 4th Street where that red X is located, and then changing the 4th Street sidewalks to a shared use path on the north side. And our understanding is that Karin and Craig have been involved in those discussions along with Maria, and so this was the direction to make this change in our plan as well. Comment 5 is focused on the Downtown Business District Master Plan and related bike and pedestrian projects. Just wanting to make sure that we are noting that this plan was reviewed and considered as part of our safety plan. So that is a minor change that we would suggest. Also, just making sure that we're referencing and incorporating the Spokane Avenue bike and pedestrian improvements from the downtown plan. And then lastly, updating project number 8 to talk about the flush pedestrian ramps. So a couple of minor adjustments just to make sure we're in alignment with that Downtown Business District Master Plan. And then the last set of comments were from the Montana Department of Transportation, and they sent our draft plan out to a variety of functional managers. So we received several comments, so they're kind of grouped under this one slide. Quite a few just minor editorial changes and clarifications that they suggested that would be easy for us to make. They also wanted to make sure that we were referencing MDT plans as being considered and related to this plan. So that's another small change that we can make. They had a couple of suggestions in our strategies just in terms of terminology or suggesting some additional example actions or resources and guidance that we can include just to help bolster some of those discussions in the plan. They had a couple of project updates that they suggested, all of the projects, they would like to see a little bit more discussion of maintenance funding and responsibility, roles and responsibilities for that, and then a couple of suggestions relating to projects 8 and 10. Then the last two, up front, they suggested that we had more of a disclosure that this plan really is focused quite a bit on bicycle and pedestrian concerns and safety issues. That was a predominant concern from the public and the community as we were talking with folks at public meetings and the online commenting map and our task force. So just making that clear to the reader up front was a suggestion from MDT. And then lastly, they wanted to see a little bit more discussion of the rationale for how the focus areas were identified, and also that some of the crash types overlap. So for example, an intersection crash could also be coded as a speed-related crash or a pedestrian-involved crash, etc. So that brings us through the comments that we received. So feel like these are fairly minor, but we do recommend a couple of minor adjustments to address those comments. In terms of next steps, adoption will be the next steps, and again, we are recommending that with incorporating those final revisions that I touched on. From there, then it will be focused on implementation of the plan, and part of that is funding identification. So mentioned that this safety action plan is a first step in being eligible for additional grant opportunities, and two of those are demonstration, which is a type of planning grant, and then implementation grant, which is more of a construction related grant. And this plan sets the city up for eligibility for those two grants. There are two additional funding cycles, 2025 and 2026, where the city could submit applications for those grants. And then next, regardless of funding, we're suggesting moving forward with certain things that are kind of low-hanging fruit. So one would be the non-motorist count program that Carrie mentioned, being tied to one of the focus area goals, and could be implemented with volunteer help and city assistance, but just important to gain an understanding of the baseline number of people walking and biking in the community. And then we have a number of short-term projects that are lower cost and should be a little bit easier to implement. So those would be good starting points for implementation. Last item is just the annual reporting. So this is a grant requirement as part of the planning grant for this safety action plan. And over the next few years, over the life of the plan, an annual report is due to the federal government. And so on the next slide, we have prepared a template of this annual report. We have kind of some highlights and red text, but we can jump to that next slide and just take a look at that. So this is in the city's hands right now. It will just need to be updated on an annual basis to reflect progress made against those goals and commitments. And I'll mention too that this annual report is an opportunity to revisit the plan. And so there could be adjustments in the goals or maybe even the priorities and the project types as well, to see what kind of progress you're making and if you need to adjust or make any changes. So with that, just want to thank the council again for the opportunity to talk with you tonight about the safety plan, and happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Steve.
So with the changes that you're suggesting, we can still adopt this resolution tonight, just knowing that those changes will be made and as the final draft version of the plan. Is that correct?
That's our understanding, and I think that was the intent from Craig as well.
Yeah, so I think the intent would be to adopt the resolution, but since the plan is an appendix or an exhibit to the resolution, it would come back on the consent agenda with the final version at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just mention too, what we can offer is to provide a redlined version of the PDF document and or a list of the changes that we made, so that it's very easy to compare against the version that you've already seen.
Whatever's easiest for you.
Okay.
I think a list would be fine, so you don't have to go through a red line version. Further questions for Sarah or Carrie or Karin or Craig for that matter? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time and great report, by the way. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be Resolution 25-2, adopting this plan with the final revisions. Are there any public comments this evening? Deputy.
Richard Hillner, 104 5th Street. Whitefish. I really like the plan. And just a couple of thoughts that I'm not sure whether e-bikes are motorized, non-motorized. That seems to be a controversy, and where they're appropriate and where they aren't appropriate, on which sidewalks and where there's dedicated bike paths. And so I think that eventually we're going to have to deal with that particular issue. You were talking, I think, about inventorying use, and it occurs to me that there is a security camera at the Whitefish Manor, right at the edge of the bike path, and that stretch from Riverside Park to the lake is one of the most popular segments. And if you can talk to them, get all that data, just, and because you see everything and everybody and every configuration on that particular stretch. That's it.
Thanks, Richard. Further public comment this evening on this agenda item? Michelle, anyone online wishing to provide comment? No. Angie, did you have something?
Yeah, can I just make one suggestion if we're going to make amendments to the plan? Is if we change the wording in section 1 to the city council hereby adopts the Safe Streets for All plan as provided in Exhibit A and as amended as needed.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. Thanks. With that said, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. Steve.
I move to adopt resolution 25-02 with Angie's corrections.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
Yeah,
Is it 3?
resolution 2503.
Sorry.
Sorry, Steve. Further discussion? Rebecca.
Wanted to thank Karen for her hard work on this. She's been working on it for probably decades, and and she's going to be retiring soon, so I wanted to make sure the public knew who was behind a lot of this. So thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Ben.
Are we planning to apply for those next 2 grant cycles that were discussed?
Well, ultimately, it's up to you guys, but I plan to ask your permission, yes.
Permission granted, thank you.
And would those be applied for with the assistance from RPA?
Well, if we go for the 13th Street project, it's going to be assistance from likely RPA as well as MDT.
Okay.
If we go for one of the other 2 projects, well, Baker would be the other South Spokane. Yeah, all of them would likely require MDT and perhaps some consulting services as well. They haven't announced, typically those federal grants are due in April, but having not announced them yet, my guess is they're going to get pushed back a little bit. So I think we got some time.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Steve, did you have anything to add? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign on that motion, does carry unanimously. Thanks very much for coming this evening. We'll move on to item 7, communications from our city manager. You do have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Anything for Dana this evening? Dana, anything additional to report on?
Yeah, I do just want to provide two quick updates. One, and you guys are aware of this, but the Montana Department of Commerce and the Montana League of Cities and Towns was awarded $7 million through the HUD Pro Housing grant. So that was great work by the League and the Department of Commerce getting that together. Of that $7 million, $5 million will go to the communities that are working to implement Senate Bill 382. And so when the original application went into place, the city of Whitefish noted that we could utilize $500,000 for some of the items that we need to update our growth policy, including a community wildfire protection plan for $100,000, a transit study, a zoning for affordability study with a no net loss and preservation policy, a housing needs assessment update, environmental constraints, and then vacant land and highest and best use analysis. So we haven't heard anything yet on the process for which we will be able to utilize these funds, but we're very excited and happy to see that as a larger group we were able to be awarded funds through that program. If you recall, the city had applied for that on our own in the first round of applications and were unsuccessful. The other update I want to provide to you is just a legislative update real quickly. During the work session, I'm getting texted by our lobbyists, so we have a lot going on. It is moving fast there. The number of bills continue to increase. Unfortunately, we're seeing some bills from a property tax standpoint that would really hinder our capability to provide services in the future. There is a hearing tomorrow that we'll be hopefully speaking at through Drew and writing letters, but just so you know, it's very busy. There's a lot of hearings. The system is still not working as efficiently, I think, as it should when it comes to the knowing when a hearing is going to be held. But in my manager's report, you do have a list that was as of January 14th, and that has since increased, of bills that we are tracking with the positions that we're taking. Many we're monitoring, but there are some that we are opposing and or supporting. So if you have questions, just know I'm available to answer those questions, and all I've been doing is feels like I've been reading legislative bills. So
Thanks, Dana. Steve?
I just want to ask a quick question. Does the recent bill that was passed that prevents the public from seeing what goes on behind the scenes or having access to those records, does that affect you in any way in your job and what you've been doing in tracking bills?
I have not had a request to look at the detail behind the scenes. So really what I'm looking at right now is what is available publicly online. Whether a lobbyist would want to look at the details of what's happened behind the scenes, I'm sure that there are, but it hasn't affected us. Drew has been doing a great job meeting with legislators, sharing our concerns and our positions, and so I don't think that it doesn't affect my job directly.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Dana on legislative updates? We'll move on to item 7C, consideration to approve the second amendment to the developers agreement with WHA and authorize our city manager to execute the agreement. Dana.
Thank you, Mayor Mulfeld and City Council. As you know, the Whitefish Housing Authority we have a development agreement with them to develop the formerly referred to as Snow Lot, but now it's Depot Park Townhomes project. We've had the first agreement, we've had an amendment to that agreement, so this would be the second amendment to that. And really this has to do with the construction variances that were approved by council in the first amendment, the bonding requirement. So the first amendment, that allowed for these variances did state that they would have to meet the bonding requirement determined by our Public Works Department. So we usually require a bond or a letter of credit that if they aren't going to complete those by final plat, that we will have those in place. Because this project is unique in that they have city funds that are going to the project, they have requested that they are able to use the remaining funds that we have, or a portion of the remaining funds that we have for that project, as a form of bonding. And so I drafted a second amendment that would state the city will accept as a form of bonding, restricting the use and disbursement of $439,000 roughly of the total funds identified in section 7.1, which is the $2 million that we've agreed to provide for that project, for the construction items described within that section. And so during that agreement, though, if they do decide to obtain a bond so that they can draw down those remaining funds, then we would accept that, and then we would release those funds. So basically those funds would be restricted for these projects that they aren't completing before final plat in lieu of a bond. This does save a small amount, for the project in of itself to not have to obtain a bond for those items. And we do have the funds sitting here, so if they don't complete them, we would as a city. So the budget for fiscal year 25 already accounts for the expenditure of these remaining funds. The difference would be that we're actually holding those until those items are completed. So we would expect that those expenditures would occur in a subsequent year. So really no financial impacts overall. The risk with the Housing Authority was unable to attend this evening, but she has reviewed this agreement along with the board, and they're comfortable moving forward with this. And this would bring Depot Park Townhomes, it would give them the ability to apply for final plat and move forward. So with that, staff recommends that the City Council approve the second amendment to the developers agreement and provide authorization for me to execute said agreement.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana, or can I have a motion, please? Rebecca?
Dana, could you just review, maybe for the public, when these will be built? Like, what's the timeline for them to be built? And it would be nice if Rissa was here. I understand that she can't make it, but there's been a lot of change, and so I just think we should keep the public informed about what's going on too.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly when they will be built, but I do know that they are ready to move forward with final plat. And so with that, the last remaining item we have for final plat would be getting the deed restrictions placed on the land, which Angie has been working with them on that. But I couldn't tell you when they will actually be built, but final plat is the next step that they have to meet to be able to pull any type of building permit. The agreement, though, I should state that the agreement says they have to be completed within, we gave them a 3-year extension. So it was 3 years from May of 2024.
So could we delay for 2 weeks? What would it affect them greatly if we waited for RIS to come and present to us in 2 weeks?
It would just delay final plat and being able for them to, apply for final plat. So, and then that process. So, it'd just be a delay in 2 weeks for the project.
There's been a lot of change in this project and in the Whitefish Housing Authority. So I kind of like it when we have access to them. But if you guys think I'm being too picky about this, that's okay too. I can drop it. But I was kind of hoping to ask questions a little bit too. But
Okay. Ben?
I know where you're coming from. My thought is I'd hate to hold this project up anymore. I know given the time frames, if they want to start in the spring, they really need to be bringing that final plat forward, and I know this is probably a requisite for that. But I do share your sentiments. I think at some point it would be nice if they could give us an update. It doesn't have to be in 2 weeks, but whenever you get things figured out over there, about where we're at on the project for sure.
Steve?
I haven't seen any changes to what they're planning to build, though. I think if I'm not mistaken, they haven't submitted any more changes to what they're going to build. It's just been a matter of trying to get their ducks in a row to get to final plat. Is that accurate?
That's my knowledge so far. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm not sure what RIS is going to add to what we know. And I assume they still have the same developer online to do the work. Is that, or have we had to change developers?
I haven't had any confirmation of changes to the construction, the contractor for construction at this point.
Okay.
Rebecca?
we're looking at quite a few change orders to try to do value building. And so we haven't seen anything about what they finally came up with in terms of how much, if it was significant difference from what we saw as the proposed development. And so it would be nice if we could actually be included in that at some point, since we are kind of the banker on this project. Right, thank you.
I'm happy to request the Housing Authority to provide an update. The First Amendment did require annual reporting to the city about the progress of the project and the timeline. So there is no problem in me requesting that annual report occur. I'd probably give her a month to prepare for it, though, instead of 2 weeks, because we have to have anything that's documented for the packet by next Tuesday.
I would entertain a motion, please. Ben,
I would move to approve the second amendment to the developers agreement with the Whitefish Housing Authority and authorize the city manager to execute said agreement.
is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Counselor Cornell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Dana, thanks very much. We'll move on to our last item, which is communications from us. Who would like to begin tonight? Steve.
I just have a couple things. First of all, I didn't mention this at our board reports, but we had the students from Whitefish High School present to us their policy papers about what the things that they saw as the community needed to be sort of built into the growth policy, or just for us to act on even in the short term. And I just would like to ask Dana if you could add those to our list of things to talk about at our council retreat, because some of those may become goals for the city. If that's a possibility. And then I want to ask this in an open forum. There's been a lot of delays on the CDB regarding rolling out the growth policy and how that's working, and then we've added another meeting to the calendar. So we have we're going to have a second meeting that's each month that's devoted just to the growth policy. And I just want to know, off the top of your head, is that a significant budget impact? Is it negligible? Is it something you need to research more, or?
So the only additional cost that, luckily and not luckily for the planners, but luckily for the city, our planners are exempt salaried employees. So, that it would not be an overtime cost for staff, but it would be an added cost for any type of videoing that we would have done. And so I do believe that you'll have the budget authority based on the consulting dollars that we budgeted for this year to be able to accommodate that added cost. But Dave, do you have any other concerns? Yeah.
No, I think that's.
Okay. And just to be clear, the extra time, does the planners get to take that time as flex time, correct?
Yeah, they often are able to flex, not always, but we obviously encourage that they're able to flex if they have a lower workload. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you think it'll be accommodated for in the funding that we're going to get from that grant, basically?
The video tech stuff, we have some budgeted funds just for the growth policy outside the grant funds that I think we could utilize. So I can't recall what the meeting rate is, if it's $400 a meeting or $410 a meeting. So over the course of a year, so
okay,
$5,000 maybe.
Okay, thank you.
You should negotiate with Jake.
Jake, give us a deal.
The other things, I just want to say again, give a shout out to Glacier Nordic Club. They've been doing a wonderful job grooming, keeping the cross-country trails open despite the lack of snow again, which we're all upset about. And just a reminder that keep your dogs on the leash where they're supposed to be, please. Keep them under control. And then skiers, slow down if there are dogs around, because the faster you go, the more aggressive they can be. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Steve. Ben.
So we had two work sessions earlier. First one first on the traffic impact fee. Could you kind of recap what our next steps would be with that?
Sure. I was just looking at Lainey because she's been leading that effort. So just don't want to step on her toes. The impact fee study, now that you have the preliminary results, if there was any major concerns, if you could share that with us tonight, and we can give that feedback to Colin with Tischler Bice. But otherwise, the next step would be that they finalize their report. We bring that to council, for consideration. And then if you'd like us to proceed with implementing an impact fee for transportation, we would go through that process of an ordinance and setting that up as a new impact fee.
Yeah, maybe I need some time to process it, but I felt like I had a few concerns coming out of that out of that work session. The dollar amounts seem high. especially relative to our other impact fees. I think the points that were made regarding how those high dollar amounts, what kind of projects they impact more than others, I think are fair points. And it kind of concerns me that the whole thing is based on essentially two projects, I mean, we have no shortage of traffic projects that we need done in this town, but just the way that all that math works is it all effectively pays for two projects, and it pays for 80% of them. So I don't know, maybe I just need some time to process it. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, but I left there thinking, gosh, that's a lot to be collecting on new construction projects.
I agree with your sentiment. The one comment I was going to make is if you look at our current impact fee schedule, and we frequently compare what an average, 2-bedroom, 2-bath with standard fixture units is compared to Kalispell, for example, for an X value home. And I know that number has been around $7,500 to $8,000 per development and per home. The one example they provided for a home ranging in size from 2,000 to 2,500 square feet was roughly $9,000 in additional impact fee, which would essentially double our impact fee for a single-family residential home. So I agree with Ben. Some of those numbers are a bit alarming to me, but I know that there are opportunities to phase it a number of years or, defer for 6 months to give developers ample notice that these possibly could be coming down the pipeline. But I share your concerns, Ben. And I think I need to further digest the information as well, because there's a lot contained in that report.
I agree, and I'm somewhat intrigued by the I brought up the question about, well, can we change which projects are impacted how? And the answer was basically no. Mm-hmm. However, we've talked ad nauseum forever about, should we have a policy that allows impact fees to be reduced for certain types of projects, affordable housing projects in particular? I mean, I don't know where this goes, but if we're talking about significant increases in impact fees like that, I think we should be discussing that option as well. I mean, I just think it seems it impacts an apartment. It raises the cost of building a single apartment a lot more than it raises the cost of building a large single-family home. And that's fundamentally problematic to me. And so, anyway, maybe we need some more time to think about it, but
Steve?
Yeah, my understanding was that was the maximum allowable, was the 9,000, right? And it seems like we don't have to adopt the maximum allowable. The other thing is I do share your concerns about how it impacts apartment buildings, and I don't know if we have to have a separate plan that has the list of accommodations that we make for impact fees, or if we can build that into this plan. But certainly if somebody is going to do an affordable development, we need to help them do that and if we're talking about almost doubling our impact fees, that's going to be I mean, it's already difficult to get people to build anything that's affordable here. And that would just pretty much, that would even further impact that piece of it. So I don't know if we would need to do both at the same time, or if they can be part of the same plan, or if they have to be separate. I don't know how that process would work. But I agree with you. We need to have there need to be accommodations somewhere, and at the same time as adopting the impact fee, I think.
Dana, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, so the plan that Colin is working on, we need a plan that's equitable for all projects. And so that's why you're seeing, like him saying, we can't adjust the 600 square foot versus the 2,000 square foot or 6,000 square foot. So you have to do the impact fee calculation to accommodate, like the actual report would accommodate all of them. What you adopt, if you don't adopt the maximum for all of them, we have to, as a city, make up the difference to get those projects still completed. So if you adopt the fees at any rate, you're still saying you're going to complete those projects in 10 years. And so that's one thing to be aware of. The policy on, say, affordable homes or deed restricted affordable homes is often what you see. Having a policy outside of what this report says is completely different. It's basically a policy that council would be saying, like, yes, if they're deed restricted units that meet our affordability criteria, we will waive impact fees, knowing that those projects still have to be completed. So that money is going to come from another city source, essentially. And so we aren't necessarily like having them pay and then we reimburse them, but we're waiving it knowing that we still have to complete those projects. So those would be two separate items potentially. They're two separate items until we get to the adoption of the ordinance. I think we would include that in the ordinance that says, you know, these deed restricted units are any deed restricted units are not subject to impact fees. You could do that. You could do it for all impact fees. You don't have to do it just for transportation, but if you wanted to just do transportation, you could do that. I will say the methodology change that we did from FCS group's report, where we did it by fixture size and meter size, and we did it based on a single family home versus commercial or multifamily at a rate per square foot. That did impact the higher density apartment buildings already. And so the methodology you're seeing for transportation is what we've actually already done for these prior impact fees, or that we've already done for the impact fees we currently have. And so knowing that our process before actually did encourage those multifamily, the cost now is higher just with our current impact fees. So I think it's just an important thing to recognize. And then if you want to look at, you know, what constitutes an affordable unit, I think we can talk about that. But I would lean toward, you know, something that's specific with a deed restriction or some type of requirement there. And I still have to work with Angie on some legal, as long as her interpretation is similar to what the legislative staff provided us, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, the other thing if you might look at as well is one number that I still don't fully understand is how those projects are essentially 80% funded by impact fees, which seemed high. I mean, I know they're expansion projects, but, you know, for example, we use resort tax for stuff like this potentially. I know that was brought up, but, you know, the visitation economy pays for part of things. The new residents pay for part of things, the existing residents pay for part of things, and the 80% number just seemed high, but maybe I need to read it further and understand it better.
With the resort tax credit that he was talking about, those impact fees would go down. How much, I think, is where we'd have to figure out. We've not, you know, we have a 40 at least probably project, but maybe 20 at least, but a very long list of projects for the reconstruction of streets for resort tax, just because we've added the extension opportunity for new roadways to resort tax. I think the question is, when do these reconstruction projects get delayed for an extension? And so I think that's some prioritizing that still has to happen. And then knowing that right-of-way acquisitions will, you know, take time, and then how do you do that through resort tax? And so I think there definitely needs to be some analysis on that, but over the 10-year period, if you say roughly $3 million is going to streets in total, we already know we have Armory and 6th Street right now that we've contracted to do. You're really looking at maybe 7 years of resort tax that you'd apply as a credit, or a portion of that would apply as a credit. So the rates would come down, but I don't think they're gonna come down significant enough to where you aren't increasing impact fees significantly. Transportation impact fees are historically the highest impact fee you will pay. And so that is true across the board. And why you might not see transportation impact fees, it's also unique, you know, that, and the reason it's the main arterial roads is because in some of our, you know, subdivision where they have to put in a roadway that's in their subdivision, that's a public roadway that they're building for the city that we take, you know, ownership of as right of way. But that's why we were very specific to just the main roads that people are traveling. So that's why you don't see all the projects in there. It's where those main routes in and around town. And they even had to account for people just traveling through Whitefish to Eureka. You know, those people, that's not that demand had to be taken into account too, those that are, just driving north. So it's a very complicated impact fee, and I'm not the expert on it by any means. Colin is. So when the final report is ready, because we'll have him complete that report, if I don't see a recommendation coming from him to change the methodology, but it's another one where we can have a work session and discuss it in more detail again.
I think the other concern related to right-of-way acquisition, Dana, I have that I think, Ben, you commented on in the work session is how many data points were generated to establish the land value for right-of-way acquisition? That seemed like a very high number. And I would just like some additional discussion or explanation of how that number was arrived at from the consultant, personally.
And Craig might have some more
And I'm not
information on that.
questioning those numbers, but just understanding where that came from.
Yeah, I think they were just 3 recent raw land comps that recently closed within city limits.
Yep.
And then, as he mentioned, we did have to purchase some right-of-way on the far north side of Caro at the intersection of Highway 93, and that $39 a square foot related pretty much to the $42 a square foot that we paid for that small easement.
Okay.
Now, granted, the projects in the impact fee, Baker, for example, is going to be an entire 70 or 80 foot right-of-way for, the better part of half a mile, and so hopefully there'll be some economy of scale that comes in, and we won't be paying that same number, but based on the comps that he used for those 3 other projects, that's where the $39 came from.
Okay. And then lastly, and I know that he explained rationale as to why, from my perspective, with the level of service we're seeing on Wisconsin Avenue from the viaduct north to Big Mountain Road, it's undisputable that other roads that are not identified as collectors or arterials, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, but Colorado, Dakota in particular, Skiles to some degree are now being used as basically bypasses to avoid the bumper-to-bumper traffic that we're seeing pretty much daily now in Wisconsin when the mountain closes and when the mountain opens. And how those transportation corridors could get enveloped into or be eligible for some of this funding, I would like to explore in a little bit more detail.
I'm not sure if they're, I think when we look at those, it's a road extension, and we didn't get into adding lanes, which you can get into, but this plan, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, we focused on the extension and not adding lanes as capacity.
No, I think one of the projects,
Maybe
no,
they're-
you're right, it didn't.
I
But,
think we removed
but
those.
Wisconsin, but that would be an option. So, for example, if we did include Colorado or Texas or Skiles, in that major road network, we could consider new lane miles if we wanted to add a 3rd lane. But it would only be for adding capacity to the roadway. So just reconstructing the roadway or widening it wouldn't necessarily qualify for an impact fee investment.
How are they targeting then the south end of Columbia in the plan? I mean, would the idea there be that we would be?
It's a new road.
That's a new road.
It doesn't exist, yeah, so that would be.
So that map was blurry.
That would be the extension of Columbia Avenue from 13th to Greenwood.
Gotcha, okay.
Through the old
I
hospital.
misinterpreted that map,
Yeah.
okay. Anyway, just, those are my thoughts. Rebecca, sorry, you had your hand up a few minutes ago.
Interesting discussion. It's complicated. So we have talked a lot about abating impact fees for deed restriction or affordability. And wouldn't that come from our 4 mills? I mean, is that one way we could use that money?
So you could create a program where you do basically a reimbursement program, but I think what we'd be better served with is if we can waive impact fees, which is what Senator Fern and the state seemed to lean toward that we could, and the state honestly came in and said you can't collect impact fees for ADUs. So they've already kind of set a precedent in saying that not all development has to be treated equally, even though there is an impact to the new units. I think it would be better if we were able to just waive the fees and not replace it with another funding source until that project has to come to fruition, because it might be, that we're looking at financing or some other mechanism where those 4 mills could be utilized for current programs or projects that are underway.
That's good news. I didn't know that had changed at the state level.
It hasn't changed at the state level. It was a different interpretation that we've
okay.
received.
Fingers
and so we're
crossed.
still looking into it. But
Okay.
with the state having changed the requirements of impact fees on ADUs, I think they've set the standard that each type of housing development could be looked at different.
Wow, that would be nice. Okay.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben, anything further this evening?
Yeah, I thought I'd just start a brief discussion as well on the second work session, since we were so short on time. Maybe if I could ask for staff's reaction to the meeting, or any takeaways that we might see from that.
I'll start. And then I'll turn it over to Bridger and everybody. But on deer management plans, the cost that is going to be borne by Libby when they take over management is extremely high. And so I think that's the most important thing, is that there's financial planning in with whatever plan that we adopt. Because Helena, for example, they had a deer management plan. They culled many deer, then they stopped. And now they're having to look at re-upping that program. So you're facing, I asked just briefly, what do you guys spend? $30,000, but they already have is what the state spends in Libby, but what they already have is a refrigerated truck. One of the most costly parts of this is, what do you do with the deer after the fact? And if you want it processed and provided to a food bank, you have to go through the testing and the refrigeration and the processing to have that meat be available. That is a costly part to it, but it's often the part that is needed to get community buy-in. Whitefish might be different, I don't know. And so, going through a public process of, is a plan what we need? Maybe we have a draft plan and then the public can look at it. That's fine, but I think we have to realize the financial impacts, and a plan that is adopted is going to be a tax increase if there's cost to the city. So, not to say that that's wrong, but that's just a reality of it.
It seems to me, if I may, one of the points Ethan made and the challenges they're facing in Libby, and hopefully not the landfill now, is they're being forced to now react rather than being proactive. And that resonated with me. And I'm not advocating that we start controlling deer by any means. I could be convinced. But before we could even get authorization to do so from the Fish and Game Commission, it seemed like the logical first step is adopting a plan. And I can't imagine those plans are very difficult to author, Bridger.
It really depends on how difficult you want to make it. And me reviewing the plans that exist, the Helena plan is 52 pages, Roundup is 5. So I think simpler is probably the route we want to go. I think leaving options on what means, if we go to culling, what means and how that is done is left open. In Libby, I believe they're using traps and disposing the deer that way with a bolt gun. I think Whitefish is unique. We used to dispatch deer on a regular basis, and as the city has grown, it's not safe to do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people question us on, well, just shoot it. Well, there's a lot of liability in just shooting that deer, and they don't want to die. So it's not that simple. So I think providing that meat to a food bank is the right approach. It's the expensive approach.
Yep.
And then if we utilize police personnel, it's gonna have to be on an overtime basis. There's some equipment, it's marginal what we'd have to purchase to do that. But then when we do that at night, disposing of those deer or preserving those deer for consumption is gonna be the question. Time of year, those type of things, we can figure it out, where that occurs, the location. Is it in our green spaces? We're gonna need to talk to the park board about that. We're gonna need to talk to private partnerships in that as well. And then how many deer do we need to cull? Yeah. And I think that's where that plan comes in. And I think hopefully the commission would give some feedback on, are we annual report, are we seeing a difference, or is the rural areas now filling in the gaps that we've created? So there's a lot of questions there, but I can surely author a draft of a plan and pass it around for review and additions or deletions.
Maybe even before you go to that level of effort, understanding the complications and challenges with anything we do, to your points, could you just distribute some example plans via our city email accounts for us just to get up to speed with some similar adopted plans that we may want to consider?
Most definitely.
Just before you put the effort in authoring one.
I think it would also be really good to see what the county does with FWP. 10 miles from a landfill is Whitefish. They don't know what they're doing yet, and that was my discussion with them after, is how does that impact our community? And so they'll issue more hunting licenses, and that's, or more hunting tags. That's going to be the approach, I believe. And then, but they said some deer that they've tracked, when they're tracking, I think it was like somewhere down in probably the west kind of valley, they go all the way up to Good Creek. So these deer travel really far, the ones that they do have tagged. And so it'll be interesting to also see what their approach is. If, when we develop a plan, I think we should take into account what they're also doing, because that will impact it. So, if we're seeing less deer come from the county because they're calling out there, I think that's also something we should have at least identified in the plan of those, because I think it would be great if it was a county-wide plan, really. I mean, that deer travel, they don't know city limits. That would be the best approach. But I think obviously we can distribute those reports, but just knowing that the county's still trying to figure out what they're gonna do with FWP, I think that would help give us some indication too of what we can do here as well.
Great. Steve?
Can we start by just culling them all and see who comes back? Sorry. I do have one thing that is probably the lowest hanging fruit, and that's communication. And I don't know if we have rolled out any communication about not feeding deer and putting it in every newsletter that goes out, with some information that CWD is close by now. And it's really important that people don't. And then also, providing a number to call if they notice that their neighbors are not home and there's apples falling off their trees or whatever it is. I mean, I have a neighbor that feeds deer regularly. So, and I've talked to him, my neighbors talked to him, I've talked to Bridger about it. But I think education is a piece that we can do on an ongoing basis. It doesn't really cost us anything, and that's probably the very lowest hanging fruit of the plan in the first place. So if we could start that sooner than later, that would be great.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And for the systems we have in place, you can make an anonymous tip on our online reporting software, which is on our website, and just give us the information. And again, we'll start with reaching out to those individuals and educating them, making a contact with FWP to assist us. That's usually our approach. Whitefish Police and FWP talk with that resident to encourage them to stop. If they do not, then that's when we start taking enforcement action. Seems to work.
I think two of the observations that I had coming out of the meeting was, number one, it felt to me like last time they were here, I don't know when that was, a couple of years ago, it felt like they were a little more assertive that we need a plan and we need to cull deer. And and maybe my recollection is just bad, but this time it seems like they were kind of more not pushing that as hard, or maybe leading to my second point, which is kind of leaving it up to us is an interesting tactic when they're the kind of the experts. So, you know, what's the right amount of deer in this town to have a safe population and whatever? I have no idea. And I was kind of surprised that there's not a lot of more structured guidance about what the cities should do in response to CWD. And so, anyway, it just seems like, yeah, some more discussion, more work is required to establish that. I don't know. So.
Yeah, and on that note, you know, I think my initial approach when I received this was to, well, how many deer do we have, and what's acceptable, and we need to have, you know, a start, and then the expectations of the goals that we're trying to reach. Counting deer is difficult, and their process and methodology to do it is weird. It doesn't make any sense to me. So they suggested that we consult with somebody to do that, and there is a consultant, and we reached out to them, and we had a bid for that. Dana, do you remember? I think it was right around $10,000 to $17,000, depending on what level. But I believe that's something that's going to have to be ongoing. That's not a one-time cost. That would be the initial assessment, and then you'd have to move forward with a follow-up assessment, again, probably at that cost.
And then it seemed what an acceptable population level would be, regardless of the science, is what's acceptable to those that live here. I mean, that was kind of the message that he sent. So.
I just feel like it's going to be a little hard to justify any kind of significant expenditures in this area without, in my opinion, having some more clear guidance from the fish and wildlife experts on what to do. I mean, I just feel like we're kind of out here. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Rebecca.
Yep. Well, I'll just bring this up again. The bear management specialist and these guys that are dealing with chronic wasting disease in white-tailed deer both recommended that we take down fruit-bearing trees on city property. So I'm just going to keep saying that until we actually have a discussion about it. And so that's one thing we can do, is we could be proactive about not attracting a place where they all hang out and then the soil gets contaminated. I just wanted to ask Chief Hadley if he would like to call out the 4 firefighters that are down in LA and honor them for their service. I think that's pretty amazing that they're down there.
Yeah, we've got Saxon Kuro, Jameson Smith, Glenn Hartman, and Sal Vaccaro. They've been down there for almost 2 weeks. They'll be down there for 18 days at least. They could get extended with the weather event that's coming in, but right now they're still looking at coming back on day 18.
They've been posting on your Facebook site too about what they're doing. So they're going around in places right now that have already been burned to look for hot spots and putting them out. But thank them if you talk to them. It's pretty amazing. And then that's all other than ice clearing. I asked our Parks and Rec department to clear the ice at the city parking lot from, I think it's 3rd Street and Central. So they put rocks out. So I went back and chipped ice for about 45 minutes because it hadn't been done most of the winter. So I'm just wondering if we could assign that to someone to clear the snow and ice, since we're responsible for it. I mean, I've brought this up before, but I've been getting feedback from business owners down there. And I think it is city property, isn't it, Dana? That parking lot?
The parking lot at 3rd and Central is, yes.
Is ours?
Yes.
Yeah. So we should be clearing the sidewalk and chipping ice. Is there anybody?
The sidewalk maintenance is our responsibility. I don't know if Maria has any input on that, but, I think obviously we had snow events and then those become, walked on, and so it does become difficult, likely not the high priority. I don't, there are, to be clear, like our responsibility would be right around the parking lot, not in front of any businesses, but around the parking lot, that is our responsibility.
Has anybody been assigned to do it besides me? Which I don't mind chipping ice. It's kind of good exercise, but I'm not that reliable to do it all the time. So I'm just wondering if there's anybody on our staff that could be assigned to do it.
Who assigned you?
Me.
Okay.
I mean, I just do that stuff all around town. Whenever I see things that need to do, I just, but
nice.
but then I thought we probably should assign someone to do this so that it's not me, doing it.
So that is a Parks and Recreation Department responsibility. We do have staff that is checking on that. If you do have a specific request of an area that you're seeing is accumulating, let me know and I can direct my staff in that way.
Okay.
Yep.
But should they just be going by to check it regularly, or do they just do it only by complaints?
No, they are clearing after the immediate accumulation, but if it has been walked on after and then it starts to build up, they may not be seeing that. So if you just see anything out there that is a problem that we're not catching, just let me know and we'll get out there.
Okay, thank you. That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Happy birthday, Dana. Tomorrow.
you.
Hope you have a great day and can spend it with your family and not entirely at City Hall. You'll
I'll
be
be
here.
here.
Okay. Well, happy
Thank you.
birthday to you.
Thank you.
So, anything further from staff? We are adjourned. Thanks.